What motivates a serial killer? For some, it's sheer hatred against humankind.
He was punishing those who had the good fortune to be raised in a warm, loving home.
Some of these murderers seek revenge for an abusive childhood.
They're destroying him out of a need for vengeance.
And then there are others who just simply love to kill.
Israel Keyes killed because he enjoyed it. He got adrenaline rush from it. He loved the thrill of it.
What creates these cold-blooded monsters? What drives their work psyche? Now, the actual voices and visions of serial killers.
Once I started, and there was nothing else like it.
Plunge us deep inside their complex and twisted minds. February 1st, 2012. It's a cold winter's night in Anchorage. A heinous crime is about to be committed. 18-year-old Samantha Koenig is working alone at the Common Grounds Coffee Hut.
A little bit before closing time that night, a tall man in a dark coat walked up to the window and he ordered an Americano coffee. And he stood there and watched as Samantha turned around and made it. When she turned back around, he had pulled a gun on her.
Shocked and surprised, Samantha raises her hands as if being held up.
He tells her it's a robbery. She kind of steps back, surprised. He then ends up coming in through the window, climbs in through the window, and ties her up with some zip ties, and then forces her at gunpoint out of the coffee stand and walks her back to his car.
The abductor's name is Israel Keyes. He is a serial killer, responsible for a steady string of brutal murders for more than a dozen years.
Keyes didn't have a real victim profile. He was pretty unusual for serial killers. He didn't have a certain race or a certain age or a certain sex that he targeted. He was much more random. It was more opportunity crimes with him, just who happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And for Samantha Koenig, she was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Keyes had decided that he was going to rob this particular Common Grounds coffee shop. That's originally what he planned on doing, just robbing it. But when he got to it, when he saw Samantha, he changed his mind and decided to take her.
Keyes tries to keep his captive calm by telling her it's only a kidnapping. He's going to hold her for ransom. He takes Samantha Koenig to the shed next to his home and binds and gags her. Incredibly, his live-in girlfriend and 10-year-old daughter are in the house just several feet away.
He took her into the shed, closed it up, tied her up in there, left her in the shed. He then actually got information from her and went to her house where her truck was parked outside to get her wallet, to get her ATM card and some other things. Came back to the shed where she was still subdued, and then that's when he raped her.
Still, Samantha prays she will survive this horror. Hoping it's only a kidnapping, she gives Keyes her ATM PIN number. But she never had a chance once Keyes made up his mind back at the coffee hut. Keyes strangles the helpless young woman.
Well, he enjoyed the thrill, the adrenaline rush of it. He enjoyed having control over his victims. He enjoyed seeing their fear. He raped his victims, we know that.
Astoundingly, after the murder, Keyes immediately returns to his normal life.
So after he kills Samantha, he drank a glass of wine calmly, went back into the house where his daughter was sleeping and his girlfriend was sleeping. And later on that very morning, they all leave for a pre-planned vacation. They fly to Houston and then drive to New Orleans for a cruise, for a one-week cruise.
Keyes doesn't have time to dispose of Samantha's body prior to the trip.
Before leaving, he had put Samantha's body in a cabinet in the shed. The thought being that it's so cold in Anchorage in the middle of winter that her body would be perfectly preserved there while he was gone.
Meanwhile, a frenzied hunt begins for Samantha. Her dad launches a grassroots campaign to find his daughter. Upon returning home, Israel Keyes calmly checks back on Samantha's corpse.
When he gets back, Samantha's body's frozen solid in the cabinet there. He has some difficulty getting it out, actually. He takes the body out, thaws it out with heaters, has sex with the corpse.
Then, in a horrifying turn, Keyes makes a successful ransom demand by sending a photo of the young woman made up to appear alive. He applies makeup, sews her eyes open with fishing line, and poses the body alongside an edition of the Anchorage Daily News from 4 days earlier.
And then ultimately ends up cutting her up into pieces, dismembering the body to get rid of it. Puts her body parts in trash bags and hauls them to a lake, a frozen lake near Anchorage, and cuts a hole in the ice, drops the bags into the water, weighs them down, and lets them sink to the bottom of the lake.
On March 6th, with her ATM card in hand, Israel Keyes flies to Las Vegas and rents a car. And a dramatic chase begins. At this point, police think they are tracking a kidnapper. They have no reason to believe he is a serial murderer. They have no clues to his identity and no concept of the enormous depth of his crimes. Keyes is a 34-year-old psychopathic serial killer, and like so many of these monsters, he's able to commit these grisly crimes while still carrying on a normal life.
Somehow he was able to just maintain this dual existence, having these two separate identities, the one of the family man, the devoted father, and the one as the killer.
Detective Malcolm Ryman encountered these types of violent psychopaths for over 30 years as a New York City Police Department homicide investigator. He specialized in sexual predator and serial killer cases.
People expect to see serial killers as being some type of drooling maniac, creepy, maniacal person, and it's not really the case. And what you'll often find is they're charming, articulate, friendly, normal people.
The FBI defines psychopathy as a personality disorder manifested in people who use a mixture of charm, manipulation, intimidation, and sometimes violence to control others and satisfy their own selfish needs. Psychopathic serial murderers have no empathy for their victims and no remorse for their crimes. And sadly, they're surprisingly hard to spot.
Israel Keyes had his own business. He had a construction business. All his clients reported that he seemed very normal. He seemed very friendly most of the time. He seemed nothing unusual about him. The neighbors reported. He just seemed like a normal, friendly guy from all appearances.
But Israel Keyes is far from normal. He sets out from Las Vegas on a determined drive across the Southwest. He heads through Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Along the way, he stops several times to withdraw ransom money from Samantha's ATM account.
When he made the withdrawal, there would be a ping basically on the investigator's system. They would know, oh, the card's been used at this location. So they would rush to the location, but of course by the time they got there, Keyes was long gone. He was off in another town somewhere else.
Investigators still have no idea who the kidnapper is, what kind of car he's driving, or if Samantha is with him on his journey. Meanwhile, Samantha's disappearance has now gained national attention, fueled by her father's relentless efforts to save his daughter. Israel Keyes is cleverly staying one step ahead of law enforcement. But then, the man known as the most meticulous serial killer of the 21st century makes an uncharacteristic mistake. And police uncover shocking truths about this heartless serial killer. Alaska serial killer Israel Keyes abducts 18-year-old Samantha Koenig and brutally rapes and murders the young woman. He stashes her body in a cabinet and calmly leaves on a family vacation. Upon his return, he dismembers the corpse and drops the remains in a frozen lake, but still convinces her father and the police she's only been kidnapped. Now, law enforcement is tracking Keyes through the southwest United States by the use of Samantha's ATM card, hoping she is still alive. What's going on inside the warped mind of this killer, and what drives him towards these heinous acts? Keyes is energized by his crime and craves more thrills.
Well, in addition to using the ATM card while he was in Texas, Keyes also decided he was going to rob a bank. This is something he'd done before. He'd robbed several banks before in the past. He found a house in a small town in Texas, Salado, Texas. He broke into the house, burglarized it for what he could, and then set it on fire. And the point of setting it on fire was for diversion. So in other words, he planned on the fire drawing out the police from the nearby town so that he could then go to the town and rob the bank, which he did. He went and robbed the bank in Salado, Texas.
The anonymous murderer continues across the Southwest. But finally, investigators catch a break. It's an uncharacteristic slip-up for a killer whose precise planning has kept him under the radar for many years. At one of his ATM withdrawals, the security camera catches a glimpse of Keyes' rental car. It's a white 2012 Ford Focus.
And it wasn't until they got the video of his rental car that they had something concrete they could actually search for. So then the FBI put out a BOLO, be on the lookout for this 2012 white Ford Focus.
On March 13th, a Texas highway patrolman spots the white Ford in the parking lot of a Quality Inn motel in Lufkin, Texas.
Keyes got in the car, drove off, and they pulled him over. In the car, they found, in addition, obviously, to the strangeness of this driver having an Alaska driver's license, they also found Samantha Koenig's cell phone. They found Samantha Koenig's ATM card, a gun, cash with ink stain on it from robbery, and they knew they had their guy.
Before we ask any questions, you must understand your rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you questions. You have the right to have a lawyer with you during questioning. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you before any questioning.
The Anchorage police and the FBI interrogate Keyes, still having no idea he may be involved in any other murders. Sadly, on March 31st, 2012, he gives a gruesome confession of Samantha Koenig's torture and murder. And then, the complex psychology of Israel Keyes begins to unveil. He hints that there are other victims, many other victims.
There is no one who knows me, or who has ever known me, who knows anything about me, really. They know they're going to tell you something that does not line up with anything I tell you because I'm two different people, basically. And the only person who knows about what I'm telling you, the kind of things I'm telling you, is me.
How long have you been two different people?
Long time. 14 years.
Over the next 9 months, investigators attempt to piece together other crimes Keyes may have committed. More than 40 hours of complex interrogation and psychological maneuvering reveals a killer with a shockingly precise method for serial murder.
In the case of Israel Keyes, Even after he was arrested, he still felt the need to try to control the situation, control law enforcement, and make the situation as beneficial for himself, despite the fact that he was apprehended as a serial killer. So for example, he was only willing to give very limited information to police, even though they had arrested him. So he was willing to negotiate, but he had very specific stipulations associated with all of the information he was willing to give out, and he was only willing to give out more once the stipulations were fulfilled.
Investigators hope he'll cooperate and help bring closure to the victims' families, while Keyes often focuses on receiving coffees and cigars.
First of all, do I get a cigar today? What I can do is I can give you something.
We'll get that cigar.
There was a bank robbery in Tupper Lake. Well, that was me, and I'm sure it was probably the only bank robbery in that town for a while. So.
Security cam photos confirm Keyes' account. The investigators and Keyes share a laugh about using real hair for his disguises. Keyes' response is chilling.
You use real hair. Where do you buy real hair?
You don't have to buy real hair to get real hair.
Fair enough, I guess.
You just take it, don't you?
Hair is free. Everything's free if you take it.
He wanted to have control. He seemed to enjoy toying with the investigators as well. He would generally allude to certain crimes without giving details or specifics, leaving the investigators wanting more and more from him and kind of drawing them along that way.
Interrogating these cunning serial killers can be very challenging for investigators. Detectives call the interrogation room the box.
When I'm in the interview room, when I'm in the box with the serial killer, before I go in there, I want to know everything about that person. I want to know every intricate detail about that person's life. I want to know about the traumatic things that happened in childhood. I want to know about previous crimes. I want to know everything about them. I want them to feel transparent. I want them to feel like there's nothing that they can hide from me that either I know or I'm going to find out.
Experienced detectives learn how to read nonverbal cues and how to manipulate the suspect to get the information they need. Investigators notice that Israel Keyes gets physically excited when he talks about his kills, rapidly tapping his hands and feet and jangling his shackles. It's a way detectives know when he is telling the truth. With Israel Keyes, this process is extremely difficult. Keyes agrees to continue to cooperate on the condition that they keep his name out of the press.
We could work out some sort of agreement that, I give you all the answers on these cases, and families get closure, and you find as many of them as possible, and in return for that, I don't plan on being around a whole lot longer, but a really big concern to me is, my kid's going to be around. I don't want her to, type my name in the computer and have it pop up,
He doesn't want his 10-year-old daughter to hear about his grisly crimes.
I'm not in this for the glory. And I don't see why the media has to get involved at all.
FBI Special Agent Jolene Godin is part of the interrogation team.
He wanted the death penalty, and he wanted it fast. It was, speaking generally, that was what he wanted. There were little things along the way that he wanted. He wanted evidence returned to family members and things like that. But big picture, what he wanted to avoid trials. He wanted to avoid publicity in media. He wanted to avoid being taken from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and tried in multiple places. And ultimately, he wanted the death penalty, and he wanted it quickly. He didn't want to sit in jail for a long period of time.
Investigators tell Keyes he won't get the death penalty without other victims. He slowly begins to reveal information about others he murdered. They learn that Keyes has been eluding capture through brilliant planning. He has studied the serial killers of the past and idolizes Ted Bundy. But they're shocked to discover that there's never been any serial killer quite like Israel Keyes. The FBI and the Anchorage, Alaska Police Department are deep into the interrogation of serial killer Israel Keyes. Keyes has already confessed to one heinous murder, but now investigators are unraveling horrifying layers of complex and unspeakable crimes.
So Keyes viewed the entire country as his hunting grounds. So what he would do is, even though he was based out of Alaska, okay, out of Anchorage, he would fly to another city. Okay, say for example, he'd fly to Chicago. Okay, once he got there to Chicago, he would rent a car. He'd then drive that car to a different state or through multiple states, putting on hundreds, even thousands of miles before he got to where he actually committed the crime. So the crime was committed thousands and thousands of miles away, multiple jurisdictions, so it made it very difficult to try to track him or come up with any sort of suspect in the crimes.
Everything was meticulously planned, and our interviews with him were the same from his standpoint. I mean, I never got the sense that he, accidentally told us something or got angry and riled up and then something flew out of his mouth. My sense was that he knew every time he came in kind of what he was going to give us that day.
In the chilling interview, Keyes talks about his inspiration and his motives.
Talk about other people like that?
I probably know every single serial killer that's ever been written about. It's kind of a hobby of mine. So I don't really consider myself all that different or all that special from hundreds of thousands of other people. All you have to do is type in a word search on any given porn site, and there's all kinds of people who have fantasies about rape and bondage and kinds of things that I take to another level. I think with me it's a combination of things. It's not it's not just about the sexual fantasies, and it's definitely not just about the money, and it's not just about the adrenaline, but it's all of those things together, and that's what I get out of it. And once I started doing once I started, and there was nothing else like it.
In his intricate planning, Keyes even goes so far as to bury pre-packed murder kits in at least 5 states around America.
Israel Keyes put so much thought and preparation and planning into his crimes. He would use what he called kill kits. These were 5-gallon plastic buckets. He would then put certain things in the buckets that he wanted to use for his crimes. He would put guns in the buckets, he would put ammunition in the buckets, he would put zip ties in the buckets, he would put tape in the buckets, flashlights, whatever he thought he would need. He'd then seal up the bucket and bury it in the ground. He did this in multiple states. He did it in New York, he did it in Vermont, he did it in Washington, he did it in Alaska. Then he would return to these sites, sometimes years later, and dig up the bucket, get the items out, and then use them for the crime.
He even included caustic chemicals like Drano and lye to help dispose of the bodies. The kits allowed him to travel without any weapons or tools to avoid security concerns at airports. Keyes referred to his kits as buried treasures. Investigators find that Keyes uses guns to control his victims, but that's not how he likes to kill. Keyes takes investigators through the killing of Bill and Lorraine Currier in Essex, Vermont in June of 2011. 4,000 miles from Anchorage. It's a typical stalk and kill murder for this ruthless predator.
The Curriers were chosen mostly at random. And I say mostly at random because there was a little bit of a criteria involved. Not for the victims themselves, not for the Curriers themselves, but for their home. Keyes had certain things he was looking for that particular night. He wanted a 1-story building. He wanted a home with an attached garage. He wanted a home that it looked like there weren't any children there. And unfortunately for the Curriers, Their home fit the profile to a T. He called it a blitzkrieg attack. He broke in through the garage. No one could see him. It was an attached garage, so he broke in the window in the garage door, broke into the kitchen of the house, immediately stormed into the Keys' bedroom and surprised them, subdued them, and took them away.
But Keys says he was unhappy. It didn't go according to his plan, and he had to shoot Bill Currier.
He typically liked to strangle his victims to death. It was kind of a more personal murder, hands-on, literally, in the killing. So in the case of Bill Currier, the murder victim in Vermont, he was shot and killed, which is very unusual for Keys to do. And the reason why Keys did it is Bill Currier was not cooperating, not following directions. Ultimately, it was the loss of control of the situation. There was screaming and shouting and was not following instructions, not following directions from Keys. And this loss of control angered Keys. It pissed him off. And he reacted violently, shot him multiple times.
Keys states he was disappointed because he had other plans for Bill Currier.
He never specified what the other plans were, but implied in that is that there was definitely some sort of torture that was in mind.
This idea of power and control often runs through the motives of many serial killers. For years, researchers have tried to identify and categorize what creates and drives these monsters. Israel Keys fits in the categories of seeking power and control, as well as the sheer thrill of killing. Sex and torture are also common elements of serial murders, but these components are not always involved.
I see really two basic types that I've dealt with. And the first type being a sexual predator hunter who's going out and hunting down victims, seeking them out, and deriving some type of sexual pleasure in victimizing them. And then you have another type of serial killer who's exacting some type of revenge. It's a revenge killer. They're getting revenge from rejection, alienation, perceived slights against a group of people, and they're destroying them out of a need for vengeance.
Keys seems to fit into the sexual predator hunter category, while another brutal serial killer from the Ukraine falls into the revenge category. Anatoly Onoprienko took the lives of at least 52 innocent victims. A 12-gauge shotgun was his weapon of choice.
Serial killer who was not oriented toward sexual homicide so much as just plain misanthropic killing of one person after the other would be this fellow Anatoly Onoprienko from the Ukraine.
Onoprienko's grisly crime scenes appear to express pathological rage against families, a hatred spawned by his own troubled childhood. When Onoprienko was just 4 years old, his mother died. His older brother stayed on with his father, but Anatoly was placed in an orphanage. Apparently, this abandonment fuels his homicidal rage.
He developed a hatred, for how he was raised and for mankind in general. He would often invade a house in these small town places and kill all the people in the house, sometimes several all at once, and then burn the house down in order to further get back at the people who had the advantage of living in a nice home, which he never could do, so that he was punishing those who had the good fortune to be raised in a warm, loving home.
Many serial killers claim they are on some kind of mission, driven by psychotic visions or voices.
To commit such crimes, you have to be given the right. But I can't prove who gave me the right. Maybe God gave me the right. How can I prove it when, for example, there are 6 billion people on Earth who claim to have seen God, but they can't prove it? But maybe I've seen God. Maybe I've received a concrete task from Him, but I can't prove it.
Well, psychosis is more of there's a break with reality. The person views reality in a significantly different way than persons around them. They may have delusions, which are beliefs that have no basis in reality. They may experience voices that no one else around them hears. They may see things that no one else around them sees. They may be actually very disorganized in their thought. There's a clear break with reality. Generally they're seen as mentally ill.
Serial killers sometimes fake psychosis in order to escape the death penalty. Onoprienko tried to use insanity as his defense, but the courts felt he was faking his mental illness, and he was sentenced to death.
There's no one course that makes an individual turn into or become a criminal. There's no one individual path. There's different things you want to look at, and that one is the family dynamics, the relationship with the family, the mother, the father, the relationship the mother and the father have with themselves.
Some experts believe Keyes' unconventional childhood played a role in fueling his desire to kill. Israel Keyes grew up in a remote forest outside the small town of Colville, Washington. He was one of 9 children. His family belonged to a strict religious group called the Ark, a church associated with racist and anti-Semitic theology. He was homeschooled and had little chance to socialize with other kids. He insists he wasn't abused or neglected as a child. But could the extreme isolation in his childhood be what transformed him into a monster? Serial killer Israel Keyes has operated completely under the radar for decades. His precise planning has allowed him to murder an untold number of victims without leaving a hint of a trail. Now investigators are interrogating the killer to attempt to determine the depth of his crimes and the motives behind his depravity. It seems a strange childhood may have played a role. Keyes grew up in the isolated woods outside of the small town of Colville, Washington. He enjoyed hunting and once remarked he would kill anything with a heartbeat.
I've known since I was 14 that there was things that I thought were normal and that were okay that nobody else were normal and okay. There were some friends staying with us, and there was a cat of ours that was always getting into the trash, and we all went up into the woods and took a piece of parachute cord, tied it to the tree, and I shot it in the stomach. That was pretty much the last time anybody went in the woods with me.
Well, when he was young, when he was about 19 or 20, Keyes committed his first violent crime against another person. He was watching a girl tubing on a river in Oregon from the woods, and he decided that he was going to take her and kill her. And he took the girl, grabbed her when she was separated from the people she was with. He grabbed her off the tube, dragged her up, and raped her, but then decided to let her go.
Is it just a dreadful childhood that turns these people into serial killers? The often asked question is whether it's nature or nurture. Is it a result of their upbringing, or are they born to kill?
That's a great question. I think that question is currently hotly debated, and it's something that it's been questioned now over about 250 years. Is someone born a criminal? Is someone made a criminal?
Behavioral studies theorize that the serial killer's dysfunctional childhood may lead to this, a cold-hearted lack of empathy.
Most research that I've seen has suggested it's the interaction between nature and nurture. It's the biological tendencies combined with the right environment to allow them to act out on those tendencies. If they have a predisposition to, let's say, be impulsive or be unempathetic or to commit crimes, parents could help neutralize that. But if they have that tendency and they have very bad parents, you can imagine that that tendency could just run wild and be exacerbated.
I think absolutely that there is something innate, there is something intrinsic, something that's within somebody to become a serial killer. I think that an environmental stimuli certainly can trigger it, and there are certain traits that or occurrences that will happen to somebody that may trigger it. But the bottom line is it's got to be something within them to make them that way.
Israel Keyes develops his love for killing very early in life, and he continues honing his murderous craft. Understanding Israel Keyes' motives for killing presents a complex puzzle for law enforcement. Another notorious serial murderer from Great Britain displays a similar psychopathic love of killing.
We understand that the police called on the owners of number 163 Melrose Avenue today because they own 2 dogs, and those 2 dogs might have picked up some of the bones from 195 Melrose Avenue and buried them in their back garden.
Police described it tonight as only a cursory search and said they will be checking other gardens in the street as well.
And I think it's right to say that we have found a significant amount of human bones, and also a part of a jaw with teeth attached to it.
Dennis Nielsen is one of Great Britain's most notorious serial killers, claiming at least 12 young men as victims. Like Keyes, his murders are motivated by the thrill of killing. But Nielsen's crimes appear to be driven by a morbid fascination with death and extreme loneliness. He would lure young male victims back to his home, strangle them, and plunge their heads underwater to be certain they were dead. He'd sometimes commit sex acts with his dead victims. Nielsen said he saved the corpses for a while to keep him company.
But at least 15 people paid the ultimate price for Dennis Nielsen's hospitality. He killed them, he chopped up their bodies, and he then burned, boiled, or buried the pieces.
12 of the 16 murders happened at Nielsen's flat in Melrose Avenue, North London. Each time he hid the body under the floorboards. Nielsen was asked by police how many bodies were under the floorboards at any one time. He replied, "I didn't do a stock check or anything, it's all a bit of a jumble."
Like Israel Keyes, Nielsen shows no mental break with reality. He displays clear and calculating thought. In 1983, after 5 years of killing, plumbing clogged with human remains and the body parts found by the dogs lead to Nielsen's capture. When asked about his motive for murder, Nielsen says, "Well, enjoying it is as good a reason as any." In 1998, after his troubled childhood, Israel Keyes joins the army. He starts to drink heavily and enjoys the company of prostitutes. But he also learns more valuable skills to help him intensify his experiences.
Keyes enlisted in the Army when he was about 20 years old. He was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, and so he learned survival skills, certainly in the Army. He learned how to handle weapons in the Army. These sorts of skills that he would then put to use for committing his crimes later on.
It was during this time he meets Tammy Hawkins, and together they have a daughter. After the Army, he lives with Tammy and his daughter in the lush forests of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, and it's thought that there he puts his hunting skills to the test on human beings.
So Keyes would typically try to find areas that were isolated. Parks were one of his favorite areas to scout, to stalk people. He would then wait for people to show up. He would follow them, he would track them as necessary, and then surprise them.
It appears Keyes murders 4 victims in the forests of Washington state, often disposing of the bodies in remote mountain lakes. His murders continue for more than 14 years, and law enforcement has no idea there's even a killer at large. Then in February 2012, Keyes kills Samantha Koenig close to home in Anchorage, Alaska. A rare impulsive decision for this calculating murderer.
So one of his primary rules was not to commit these crimes where he lived. And with Samantha, he broke his own rule.
This mistake of temptation has now led to his downfall. He's now under arrest and heading for trial. In Anchorage, the negotiations continue to try to get more information from Israel Keyes. Then suddenly, during a court appearance, he once again shocks law enforcement.
During one of the hearings in court for Keyes, he decided he was going to try to escape. And while the attorneys were up arguing before the judge, he bolted, tried to run out of the courtroom. But before he could even clear the aisle there, the courtroom deputies tackled him and subdued him.
In typical fashion, Keyes shows no remorse for his escape attempt.
I mean, come on, let's face it. Yeah, what happened yesterday? Ooh, I'm a bad guy. I tried to escape, but let's be honest. Nobody really thought I was a good guy before that, so...
During months of interrogation, Israel Keyes admits to killing at least 9 people. But investigators fear the actual total is higher.
And he was very evasive at times during interviews, and he told us when we tried to pin him down on a number, he would say it was less than 12. But then there were things that he would say that led us to believe that by less than 12, he simply meant 11. And so he was quick to correct us in interviews if we had something wrong. So there were several times where we just threw out statements like, you are 11 victims, or things like that, and he didn't correct us. So based on that and some just additional things that he said, we believe the number is 11.
He traveled so extensively, both in the U.S. and in other countries, for such long periods of time that authorities haven't been able to pinpoint where he was oftentimes. So the number of victims is going to be much higher than 11, in my opinion.
Israel Keyes begs the FBI for a quick death sentence, but the agents continue to press for information on other victims. Keyes grows impatient with the process and decides to take matters into his own hands.
On December 1st, 2012, while he was in prison awaiting trial in the Koenig case, Keyes slit his wrists and also used his bed sheet to strangle himself as insurance to make sure he got the job done. So as he bled out and as his body shifted, relaxed from the bleeding, he rigged the sheets so that they would strangle him to make sure he did the job. So he committed suicide while in prison.
In many cases with serial killers, they start at a very young age. They often start in their teen years. And I think historically, they never stop. The only way that a serial killer stops historically is if they're incarcerated or they kill themselves, which somewhat often they do commit suicide.
Crumpled inside the blanket on Keyes' deathbed is a blood-stained suicide note. The case of Israel Keyes reinforces the immense challenges facing law enforcement in their efforts to apprehend serial killers.
When you take a common murder case, you start at the nucleus of that person's life. Then you work your way out from there. With a serial killer, they're often just a random person, and that person does not even figure into that investigation. And it's somebody who's completely off the radar. How are you going to find them? You have to use modern technology, and you have to use old-fashioned police work, and you have to be absolutely relentless. You just got to keep on plugging.
Keyes is really unique in the world of serial killers, and the amount of preparation and planning he put into his crimes. He was so meticulous in his crimes that he's really a new breed of serial killer. He was extremely deceptive, extremely cunning. He got adrenaline rush from it. He loved the thrill of it. If he hadn't been caught, Keyes would still be out there doing it today. As a serial killer and as an individual, Keyes was deceptive and cunning as the devil.